Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. All praises to Allah. We send peace and salutations upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Today I have a very beautiful surprise for all of you. Alhamdulillah, all praises to Allah Azza wa Jal. We are having this beautiful surprise after we were missing the beautiful lessons of Fadilat al-Sheikh Muneer Abduroaf, the beautiful lessons about Sharia and inheritance. Alhamdulillah, we have Fadilat al-Sheikh back with us to benefit the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam from his ilm and from his knowledge. So let's welcome Fadilat al-Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Fadilat al-Sheikh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته Sheikh Samih, and shukran for having me.
Jazakallah khairan. May Allah Azza wa Jal continue to use you for the service of Islam. May Allah bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase you from ilm, from hikmah. Allahumma ameen. Fadilat al-Sheikh, you may begin inshallah once again with your beautiful lessons. Bismillah.
جزاك الله خيرا شيخنا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام.
Inshallah, today I will be discussing what is referred to within laws of inheritance or the laws of succession within the South African context. I'll be looking at what is the Islamic will and what is also referred to as the Sharia compliant will. Now, when a person refers to an Islamic will or a Sharia compliant will, one normally thinks of death. And that is something that should always be on our minds. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, after أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, كل نفس ذائقة الموت, that every soul shall taste the death, every nafs shall taste the death. And that basically refers to each and every one of us. Now, as South African Muslims, it is a requirement in the event we would want to ensure that our estates evolve in terms of Sharia, that we must draft and execute a will that is referred to as an Islamic will or a Sharia compliant will. Now, how is this done? Now, this can be done in one of two ways. The first way to do this is to state in the will that after discussing or after conversing or consulting with an alim, with a specialist in Sharia law, as to the laws of inheritance, what and who your beneficiaries of your estate should be in terms of Sharia, and what you are entitled to do with certain portions of your estate, referred to as the wasiyah, and also what is required of you in terms of the laws of liabilities, your creditors and so forth. In terms of Sharia, you take all of those provisions that they have given you and draft clauses in the will stating that when I pass away, this is what I should happen to my estate, right? And basically what then happens is that the provisions in the will gives effect to Islamic law. Within the South African context, this is allowed based on the right to freedom of testation. As a testator, a person drafting and executing the will is allowed to say what should happen to his or her estate upon his or her demise. Right? So that is the first way of ensuring that you have left behind an Islamic will or a Sharia compliant will. And then when we do pass on, as we certainly will, in that instance, you can rest assured that you will lie there, and when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questions, and the angels question us in the qabr, we don't have to worry about people fighting over our estate, and also our estate going against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered in the Quran and elaborated upon by Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the Sunnah. The second way of drafting and executing a Sharia will or an Islamic will is where you don't specifically state who your Islamic law beneficiaries are. You do, however, state these are my possible liabilities. You do state that this is my wasiyah, this is my bequest in favor of so and so, such and such a person or this institution. However, you don't state who your beneficiaries are as far as the Islamic law of intestate succession or the law of mirath. What you do in this will is that you state that I leave it up to an Islamic institution, a recognized Islamic institution, to draft something what is referred to as an Islamic distribution certificate. A certificate that states who your lawful heirs are in terms of Sharia, in terms of Islamic law at the time of your demise. And you further state in the will that this certificate will be binding upon the estate. Now, by doing this, based on freedom of gestation, the master of the High Court, the one that oversees all estates in South Africa, will then have to accept this Islamic distribution certificate. The difference between the first and second method of drafting an Islamic will is that in terms of the first method, it might be that when you pass away, you leave behind a mother, a father, a son, a daughter, and a wife. And the Sharia and the Quran, more specifically ayah number 11 and 12 of chapter 4 of Surah An-Nisa, expounds and directs as to how the estate should evolve. Right? And those would be the only beneficiaries. It does become a problem if when at the time of drafting and executing the will, the factual scenario has changed from then until the point where you have passed on. It might be when you passed on that maybe your parents have predeceased you, and there might be a certain repercussion. And it might also be that you no longer have one son and one daughter. You might have two daughters and one son, or two daughters and two sons. It's also possible that you have divorced your wife and you have another wife, or you have two wives in a polygynous marriage. So the facts that are stated in the will that was drafted, where you have stipulated who your beneficiaries in terms of Islamic law were at the time of drafting and executing, was not necessarily the same beneficiaries that are entitled in terms of Sharia when you have passed on. Now, in this light, it then becomes imperative on all persons that make use of the first way of drafting an Islamic will or a Sharia compliant will to ensure that the will is updated on a continuous basis in the event where the factual scenario of that person does change. So that you ensure that when you pass on, that what is left behind is also according Sharia as per the Quran in the Sunnah of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. My advice on this very morning is that if you have drafted an Islamic will based on the first possibility, please go back to that will and revise whether or not the factual scenario is the same, or whether or not that will that you drafted a while back is no longer Sharia compliant, no longer in conformity with Islamic law. Have you now had another child which is not in the will and ultimately will not be entitled to inherit? Has your parents passed on, and therefore maybe you should remove that clause from the will? Or have you maybe divorced your wife and there are certain consequences that apply over there? Or have you maybe married another wife and is that person in the will. Most important, that will that you have drafted, either in terms of the first scenario or in terms of the second scenario, you must ensure that it has been properly executed and it is a valid will in terms of South African law. Otherwise, it becomes problematic as far as enforcement is concerned. It must meet the requirements of the Wills Act 7 of 1953. And but one example that I'll leave you with, where we normally make mistakes, is where we then appoint witnesses to sign the will, who are also our beneficiaries. So we say to the son, look here, you know what must happen, please sign here. So now you know what happens. However, that does become a problem when this will is then submitted to the Master of the High Court. Because in this instance, the will would be problematic as far as whether or not that son can benefit from the will, or is he disqualified because he is now a beneficiary also to the will. The right thing to do would be to get two beneficiaries or two witnesses to sign the will that is not related to the estator or not a beneficiary to the will, and also, very importantly, not a spouse to such a beneficiary. There are also other requirements as well, and therefore, over and beyond ensuring that the clauses in the will is in terms of Sharia, you have to also ensure that the will in itself also meets the South African law requirements in order to give effect to Islamic law once we have passed on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us true understanding. I conclude the session here and I hand back to Sheikh Samih. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan fadlat al-Sheikh for these beautiful lessons. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept and increase you in knowledge. Allahumma ameen. And continue to use you for the service of the ummah. Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khairan fadlat al-Sheikh. Shukran for your time. Allah accept. Barakallah fi. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This was Fadlat al-Sheikh Muneer Abduroaf. Fadlat al-Sheikh is an expert in Sharia, an expert in Islamic inheritance, and Fadlat al-Sheikh is also a muhadr, mashallah. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept from Fadlat al-Sheikh and bless him more and more to serve the ummah. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbil Alamin. We'll come back inshallah after the break. Stay with us.